the unseen architects, Nigeria's hidden historical structures and their untold stories. The laterite dust rose in copper-colored clouds as Amina Bello's land cruiser rattled along the forgotten road to Sukkur. As a structural archaeologist, she had documented pre-colonial architecture across West Africa, but nothing in her decade-long career had prepared her for what the rainy season had just revealed in the Mandara Mountains. "You'll think I'm mad," her former professor, Dr. Okonkwo, had said over a crackling phone line 3 days earlier. But the floods washed away part of the hillside near the old settlement. "Amina, there's something underneath, something that predates everything we know about the Sukkur kingdom." Now, as her vehicle climbed the serpentine path, Amina caught her first glimpse of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. The traditional Sukkur settlement clung to the mountainside like a memory refusing to fade. Terraced farms, stone compounds, and the symbolic palace of the Hidi chief presiding over it all. But her eyes were drawn to the fresh wound in the earth below, where red soil had slewed away to expose something angular and deliberate. She parked where the road ended and continued on foot, her boots finding purchase on stone steps worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims. The locals watched her pass with expressions that mixed curiosity and something else, a wariness that made the hair on her neck prickle. "Dr. Bello?" Okonkwo emerged from beneath a makeshift tarpaulin shelter, his white beard streaked with red dust. Behind him, partially excavated from the hillside, was a wall unlike anything in the conventional historical record. The masonry was precise, too precise for the accepted timeline of Sukkur's development. Large blocks of stone fitted together without mortar, their surfaces bearing faint geometric patterns that seemed to shift in the afternoon light. But it was the scale that seized Amina's breath. This wasn't a building. It was a foundation, extending deep into the mountain. "We've excavated 12 meters down," Okonkwo said, his voice trembling with suppressed excitement. "We haven't reached the bottom. And Amina, the carbon dating from the organic materials we found in the fill soil suggests this structure is at least 1,500 years old, maybe older." Amina knelt at the edge of the excavation, running her fingers along the nearest stone. The surface was cold despite the heat, and the geometric patterns. She pulled out her phone, photographing them from multiple angles. They weren't decorative. They were architectural, load-bearing designs that distributed weight in ways that shouldn't have been understood in first-millennium Nigeria. "Who built this?" she whispered. "That's the question, isn't it?" Okonkwo handed her a fragment of pottery sealed in a plastic bag. "We found this in the 3rd layer. The style doesn't match any known culture from this region or period." The pottery shard was thin, almost translucent in places, with a blue-green glaze that seemed to contain depth, as if tiny fragments of sky had been captured in the ceramic. Amina had seen similar techniques in Tang dynasty pottery from China, in Persian ceramics, in Roman glass, but never in West Africa and never from this early period. "There's more," Okonkwo said. He led her around the excavation to where a team of local workers had erected another shelter. Inside, laid out on tables like surgical patients, were dozens of metal objects. Not iron or bronze, but something else. Something that hadn't corroded despite spending over a millennium underground. "We think it's a copper alloy," one of the researchers explained, a young woman named Zainab who taught at Amina Bello University. "But the composition is unusual. There are trace elements we're still trying to identify." Amina picked up what appeared to be a tool, perhaps a measuring instrument, given its precise gradations along one edge. The metal was light but strong, and the craftsmanship was extraordinary. This wasn't the work of a fledgling civilization. This was the product of a sophisticated society with advanced metallurgical knowledge. "We need to inform the National Commission for Museums and Monuments," Amina said. "This could rewrite everything we understand about pre-colonial Nigerian development." "We tried," Zainab's expression darkened. "They told us to stop digging and wait for official authorization. That was 2 weeks ago. We've heard nothing since." Amina wasn't surprised. Nigerian archaeology was chronically underfunded, and discoveries that challenged established narratives often languished in bureaucratic limbo. But this was too important to abandon. Then we document everything ourselves, she decided. 3D scans, photographs, detailed measurements. If they won't give us resources, we'll make sure the work speaks for itself. As the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the Mandara Mountains in shades of amber and rust, Amina set up her equipment. She worked with the methodical precision that had made her reputation, her laser scanner capturing every millimeter of the exposed structure. But her mind was racing ahead, connecting fragments of knowledge into a shocking possibility. The geometric patterns on the stones matched mathematical principles that wouldn't be formally described in Europe until the Islamic Golden Age. The precision of the masonry suggested sophisticated surveying techniques, and the metallurgy, if the initial analysis was correct, implied a level of technical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist in sub-Saharan Africa until much later. Unless everything they'd been taught was incomplete. That night, unable to sleep in her tent, Amina reviewed the day's photographs on her laptop. She had arranged the images of the geometric patterns in sequence, and now, seeing them together, a picture emerged. They weren't random designs. They were a map, or perhaps a diagram of some kind. She traced the lines with her cursor, watching as they resolved into a network of connections, of pathways that seemed to mirror. She pulled up a topographical map of the region and overlaid it with her photographs. Her hands began to shake. The patterns matched the mountain range's geological features. But more than that, they indicated other locations, 11 of them, scattered across northern Nigeria, each marked with a symbol that appeared to represent a structure similar to the one they'd uncovered. 11 hidden sites, 11 potential discoveries that could transform their understanding of West African history. "Dr. Okonkwo," she called out, stumbling from her tent. "We need to look at this." The old professor emerged, bleary-eyed but alert. When he saw what Amina had found, his skepticism melted into wonder. "If this is real," he breathed, "if these sites exist, Amina, we're not looking at a single anomaly. We're looking at a civilization, an entire culture that's been hidden from history." They decided to investigate the nearest marked location, a site approximately 40 kilometers southwest, in the Gwoza Hills. According to Amina's analysis, it should be near an existing archaeological site that had been cursorily surveyed in the 1960s and then forgotten. The journey took most of the next day, navigating roads that ranged from poor to non-existent. They brought a small team: Zainab, 2 trusted graduate students, and a local guide named Musa who knew the region intimately. "My grandfather spoke of strange structures in these hills," Musa said as they hiked up a steep trail. "He said the ancestors built them to hold the sky in place. I always thought it was just a story." The marked location led them to what appeared to be a natural rock formation, a cluster of massive boulders piled against a cliff face. But as Amina examined it more closely, she realized the natural arrangement was anything but. The boulders had been placed with purpose, their weight distributed across hidden supports in a way that created a stable arch. "Help me with this," she called to the others. Together, they cleared away centuries of accumulated soil and vegetation from the base of the rocks. Beneath, they found the familiar precision-cut stone, the same geometric patterns, the same impossible age. But there was something else. A gap between 2 of the supporting stones, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Amina pulled out her flashlight and angled it into the opening. The beam revealed a passage, descending into darkness. "We should wait for proper equipment," Okonkwo cautioned. But Amina could see in his eyes that he wanted to explore as badly as she did. "Just a preliminary look," she promised. "We'll mark it and come back with the right gear." The passage was tight at first, requiring them to move sideways, but after a few meters it opened into a chamber. Amina's flashlight beams swept across walls covered in more of the geometric patterns, more intricate here, almost pictographic in places. And there, in the center of the chamber, was a structure that made her heart race. It was a mechanical device of some kind. Bronze gears and wheels, interconnected with a complexity that spoke of advanced understanding. Parts of it had corroded, but the essential form remained, A calculating machine, perhaps, or an astronomical instrument. "This can't be real," Zainab whispered behind her. "This level of mechanical engineering. It shouldn't exist here, not from this period." But it did exist. Amina photographed it from every angle, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she'd learned about the development of technology in human history. As they explored the chamber further, they found more evidence of the lost civilization. Ceramic vessels containing residues of unknown substances, metal tools whose purposes they could only guess at, and most remarkably, a series of tablets covered in a script no one could read, a written language that had vanished from human knowledge. "We need to get all of this to a proper laboratory," Okonkwo said. "And we need protection. If word gets out about what we found, we'll have treasure hunters, we'll have complications." He was right. Amina had seen too many significant archaeological sites in Nigeria looted or destroyed by those seeking quick profit. This discovery was too important to risk. They spent the next week documenting both sites as thoroughly as their limited resources allowed. Amina worked 18-hour days, driven by a mixture of professional obligation and pure wonder. Each new artifact, each new chamber they uncovered, deepened the mystery. The civilization that had built these structures possessed knowledge that seemed impossibly advanced for its time. They understood principles of architecture, mathematics, metallurgy, and astronomy that Europe wouldn't rediscover until the Renaissance. They had developed a written language, created complex mechanical devices, and established a network of sites across a vast territory. And then they had vanished, leaving behind only these hidden monuments, buried and forgotten for over a millennium. Why did they hide their structures? Zainab wondered aloud one evening as they sat around a campfire. Why build underground or disguise them as natural formations? "Protection, maybe," suggested one of the graduate students, "from invaders or rival groups." But Amina wasn't convinced. The effort required to conceal these massive structures suggested something more intentional, more deliberate than simple defense. "What if they meant to preserve them?" she proposed. "What if they knew something was coming, a disaster, a war, a climate shift, and they built these sites to survive it, to pass their knowledge to future generations?" The thought sent chills through her. If true, it meant the ancient architects hadn't failed. They had succeeded. Their monuments had survived, waiting for the day when humanity would be ready to understand them again. The answer came from an unexpected source. On their 9th day at the Gwoza site, a group of elders from a nearby village arrived, led by a woman who must have been in her 80s, her face a map of wisdom and years. "You have awakened the builders," she said in Hausa, which Musa translated. "We have kept their stories, as our ancestors kept them before us. Stories of the people who came before, who understood the language of stone and star." The elder, who introduced herself as Hawa, invited them to her village. There, in a small mud-brick house, she showed them what her family had preserved through generations. Oral histories, passed down through careful memorization, telling of a great kingdom that had flourished in the region long before the established historical record began. According to these accounts, the builders had been a peaceful people, focused on learning and the pursuit of knowledge. They had developed their civilization through careful observation of the natural world, learning the properties of metals and minerals, studying the movements of celestial bodies, creating tools and techniques that allowed them to thrive in a challenging environment. But their very success had made them targets. Warlike tribes from the north, envious of their prosperity, had launched a series of devastating raids. The builders, unprepared for such aggression, had been decimated. Those who survived made a fateful decision. They would hide their greatest achievements, preserving them for a future time when humanity might value knowledge over conquest. They had buried their cities, disguised their monuments, and scattered their people. Some had integrated into other cultures, carrying fragments of their knowledge with them. Others had retreated deep into the mountains, maintaining their traditions in secret. Over time, even these remnants had faded, until all that remained were stories that most dismissed as myths. "But you have found them," Hawa said, her ancient eyes bright with emotion. The builders can speak again. Amina listened to the translations with growing awe. These oral histories, if accurate, provided context for everything they'd discovered. They explained the advanced knowledge, the deliberate concealment, the widespread network of sites. This hadn't been a single settlement or kingdom. This had been a sophisticated civilization that had chosen self-erasure over extinction. Over the following weeks, Amina and her team worked to correlate Hawa's oral histories with their archaeological findings. The alignment was remarkable. Sites mentioned in the stories corresponded to locations marked on the ancient map. Descriptions of specific technologies matched artifacts they'd uncovered. Even the timeline, though imprecise, as oral histories often are, roughly aligned with their carbon dating results. They investigated 3 more sites indicated on the map, finding similar structures at each location. One contained what appeared to be an observatory, with precise markers for tracking celestial events. Another housed a workshop with evidence of advanced metallurgy. A third contained a library of sorts, thousands of ceramic tablets covered in the unknown script, preserved in sealed chambers that had protected them from decay. With each discovery, the picture of the lost civilization grew clearer. These had been the unseen architects of West African history, a people whose contributions had been erased from the record, reduced to myth and legend. Yet their work remained, a testament to human ingenuity and the stubborn persistence of knowledge. Amina knew they were running out of time. Word of their discoveries had begun to spread, and she had already fielded calls from international institutions wanting access to the sites. The Nigerian government, initially indifferent, had suddenly taken interest, not necessarily in the historical significance, but in the potential for tourism, revenue, and prestige. "We need to publish," she told Okonkwo. "Get our findings into the academic record before someone tries to control the narrative or exploit these sites." They worked frantically to compile their research, thousands of photographs, measurements, analyses, and contextual information drawn from Hawa's oral histories. Amina wrote with a clarity born of purpose, knowing that this paper could reshape African history. But she also knew it would face skepticism. The archaeological establishment had long operated under Eurocentric assumptions about the development of human civilization. The idea that sophisticated technical knowledge could emerge independently in sub-Saharan Africa, centuries before similar developments in Europe, would challenge deeply held beliefs. She didn't care. The evidence was undeniable. The stones didn't lie. The artifacts couldn't be explained away. The builders had existed, and they had achieved remarkable things. 3 months after that first call from Dr. Okonkwo, Amina stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Ibadan, presenting their findings to the African Archaeological Congress. Behind her, slides showed the magnificent structures they'd uncovered, the intricate artifacts, the undeciphered script. "For too long," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "African history has been written by those who came as colonizers and conquerors. They saw absence where there was simply concealment, primitiveness where there was sophistication different from their own. The civilization we've uncovered, the builders, as oral tradition calls them, challenges us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the development of technology and knowledge in this region." The questions came fast and fierce. Some scholars were supportive, excited by the implications. Others were skeptical, demanding more proof, questioning the dating methods, suggesting alternative explanations. A few were openly hostile, as if the very existence of the builders somehow threatened their own work or worldview. But Amina stood firm. She had the evidence. She had the sites. And now, thanks to Hawa and other keepers of oral tradition, she had context and continuity reaching back through the centuries. "This is just the beginning," she concluded. "We've investigated 4 of the 11 sites marked on the ancient map. 7 remain. Who knows what else we'll find? What other stories are waiting to be told?" In the months that followed, Amina's publications sparked fierce debate in archaeological circles worldwide. Some hailed it as a groundbreaking revelation. Others dismissed it as sensationalism or misinterpretation of the evidence. But no one could ignore it. Slowly, other researchers began to re-examine their own findings from Nigeria, and surrounding regions. Artifacts that had been dismissed as anomalies or contamination were reconsidered in light of the new framework. Oral histories that had been discounted as mere folklore were given fresh attention. A picture began to emerge of a pre-colonial West Africa far more complex and sophisticated than previously imagined. UNESCO designated the Sukkur discovery as a site of exceptional universal value, ensuring protection and funding for continued research. International teams arrived to help with excavation and analysis. Linguists worked to decipher the builder script. Archaeologists studied the unique alloys. Astronomers analyzed the observatory data. And slowly, painstakingly, the story of the builders came into focus. They had flourished during the first millennium CE, developing in relative isolation, but with clear evidence of trade contacts reaching to North Africa and possibly beyond. Their society had valued knowledge and craftsmanship above military conquest, which had ultimately proven both their greatest strength and fatal weakness. When confronted with aggressive neighbors, they had chosen preservation over defense, hiding their achievements in the hope that future generations might be wiser. For Amina, the most profound discovery came from translating the first of the builder tablets. The script, once linguists had begun to crack its patterns, proved to be based on a combination of pictographic and phonetic elements, sophisticated in its ability to convey complex technical and abstract concepts. The first fully translated text was an instruction manual for constructing one of the mechanical calculating devices. But the final passages contained something unexpected, a message, seemingly intended for whoever might eventually find these hidden sites. We who build these monuments do so not for glory or remembrance, but as gifts to those who will come after. Knowledge belongs to no single people or time. It is the inheritance of all humanity, preserved through darkness, waiting for the light. If you have found our work, know that you stand on shoulders higher than you imagined. Build upon what we have made. Reach further than we could, and perhaps, in your time, there will be no need to hide wisdom in the earth. Amina read these words with tears in her eyes. Across 15 centuries, the builders spoke directly to her, their message as relevant now as it had been then. Knowledge was not destroyed when civilizations fell. It persisted, hidden but not lost, waiting for those with eyes to see and minds ready to understand. She thought of all the other hidden histories, the civilizations that had risen and fallen leaving only fragments, the knowledge that had been suppressed or forgotten. How much had humanity lost? How many times had we been forced to rediscover what our ancestors already knew? But also, how resilient human achievement truly was. The builders had succeeded in their impossible task. They had preserved their knowledge across the void of centuries. And now, in the 21st century, their work was finally being recognized, studied, and appreciated. 5 years after that first phone call, Amina stood once more in the Mandara Mountains, but this time at a very different site. The Nigerian government, in partnership with UNESCO and several international organizations, had established the Builder Heritage Center, a world-class facility dedicated to researching, preserving, and sharing the story of the lost civilization. The center overlooked one of the original sites, now fully excavated and protected under a modern shelter that allowed visitors to see the ancient structures while preserving them from the elements. Thousands of students and scholars came each year, drawn by the chance to study this remarkable chapter of African history. Hawa had not lived to see the center's completion, but her grandchildren were there for the opening ceremony, honored guests who represented the unbroken chain of oral tradition that had kept the builder memory alive through the dark centuries. As Amina gave tour to the first visitors, she found herself returning again and again to the deeper meaning of their discovery. The builders weren't just a historical curiosity or an archaeological sensation. They were proof that human civilization was far more complex, far more resilient, and far more interconnected than the simple linear narratives suggested. They challenged the notion that technological progress moved in only one direction, from primitive to advanced, with Europe as the inevitable pinnacle. They demonstrated that sophisticated knowledge could emerge anywhere, under the right conditions. They showed that setbacks, even catastrophic ones, didn't erase human achievement, only hid it temporarily. And they reminded everyone that the absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. How many other civilizations had been dismissed, overlooked, or erased from history? How many other stories waited to be uncovered? The work continued. 3 more of the 11 sites had been excavated, each revealing new facets of builder culture. The script was becoming more readable, allowing translation of technical manuals, astronomical observations, and, most intriguingly, philosophical texts that revealed a society deeply concerned with ethics, knowledge, and humanity's relationship with the natural world. Plans were underway to investigate the remaining 4 sites, though some had been located in areas where political instability made archaeological work dangerous or impossible. Amina hoped that someday, perhaps in her lifetime, all 11 monuments would be revealed, the complete network of the builder civilization finally restored to human knowledge. As the sun set over the mountains, painting them in the same amber and rust tones that had captivated her 5 years earlier, Amina reflected on how much had changed. She had entered that first site expecting perhaps an interesting addition to the archaeological record. She had found instead a revelation that challenged and enriched the entire understanding of African history. The builders had achieved their goal. They had preserved their knowledge across 15 centuries of forgetting. They had spoken to the future, and the future had finally learned to listen. And now, their monuments no longer hidden, their stories no longer untold. The unseen architects had taken their rightful place in the great narrative of human achievement, not as a footnote or anomaly, but as evidence of Africa's rich, complex, and sophisticated past. Amina smiled, thinking of that message carved in stone and ceramic. Build upon what we have made. Reach further than we could. That, she thought, was exactly what they would do.